Welcome to the business track as part of the program. First up, panel I'll be hosting, the business case, how to justify and scope a migration project. Speakers are Lakshmi Hanspal, Chief Trust Officer at DigiCert, Colin Soutar, Global Quantum Cyber Readiness Lead at Deloitte. Lakshmi is here and Colin from Deloitte. Great to have you guys back on theCUBE and good to see you again. Lakshmi, great to see you. Colin, we'll start with you. As the landscape is changing, you got regulations. What is the big change over you're seeing right now in the market? Because you're starting to see the readiness has been there. Not everyone's ready, but now you're starting to see the transformation. Can you share your perspective?
Yeah, I think what we're starting to see over the last year or so is much more of a board awareness of the topic of quantum cyber readiness. I think there's also, along with that, being more of an understanding. This is a particular risk, and there's been excitement and a lot of discussion around quantum. When is it going to happen, and so on. I think people are starting to treat this now more as it's a risk, and let's figure out how we deal with other risks and correspondingly deal with this. Starting to plan, do their discoveries, understand what their potential vulnerability can be, start to build out a roadmap, and then even think about implementation as well. So really, I would say getting it much more on a commonplace risk mitigation approach rather than something that is, so unique around the quantum topic.
On the business case specifically, are people aware? Share the progress bar, if you will, on the appetite for leaning into the business case, or are they exploring, kicking the tires? Where are we on that business case spectrum?
So two things. One is we're seeing a marked uptake in the connection between post-quantum cryptography updates and things like public key infrastructure, PKI upgrades or modernization. Starting to see that in a lot of cases where organizations understand they need to update the full PKI suite. And what better time to do PQC upgrades, which we totally endorse. That's a great approach. Secondly, one of the things that I've been thinking about for the last year or so, and I'm starting to see some traction around it, is there's obviously a cost to upgrade, right? And that's very, you can figure out what that is. As we go through the next couple of years, and the majority of organizations will be further along in their upgrades to post-quantum cryptography, what we think is going to happen is that there will essentially be two levels of trust, where those that have upgraded understand that they can trust each other to that degree. Those that have not will not be trusted as much. And so actually doing business across those two levels of trust will become somewhat problematic. That's where we think there'll be the emergence of a cost of not upgrading. And there'll be an inflection point. My prediction is about 2 to 3 years from now, where that will occur. And it'll be much easier to make the business case because they'll actually be thinking about the consequences of not upgrading at that point as well.
Lakshmi, let's talk about the success we've seen out there. We see from the winners last year and the finalists that on the program you guys had. Customer zero came up a lot. What does success look like? Define how this works, because as people get ready, they start to see the scope, they start to understand it. Some are progressing faster than others. Define success. What does success look like? Are there KPIs? You guys have been there with Customer Zero. A lot of their customers and people who are pioneering this are blazing the trail. Define success.
So Customer Zero is a program within DigiCert where we are using our own technologies for our own consumption, and wherein we can showcase to our customers the best trust posture that's possible. And with that in mind, we have to look at the context of what success needs to be. And the context, as I see it, to add on what Colin's observation, I think there have been 3 pivotal changes in the last year. The first is regulatory and standards acceleration. NIST has come up with its first 3 standards, 203, 204, and 5 on quantum readiness. We've had the EU coalition, we've had the UK coalition on quantum with their deadlines anywhere between 2029 and 2033. So there's been that. Then technology readiness. And the cloud providers are getting ready to be quantum safe compute. We've had AWS announce those already. DigiCert has a quantum ready platform because we are part of critical infrastructure for certificates, for software, for devices, and for documents and other areas. So it's made it from a theoretical exercise into practical implementation. And the third part is the urgency paradox. And John, this is where we are asking our organizations to invest in threats that have not yet materialized because we don't have a practical test in quantum computers yet. But the window for planning and preparedness is narrowing. And that's the paradox. So success for this is three simple words: quantum safe design. And so what does quantum safe design mean? It has 5 attributes. And first is crypto resiliency and agility, the ability to swap algorithms without architectural changes. Second, to be able to do this in a hybrid way, support classical crypto algorithms along with PQC ready ones. Zero business disruption. If you think about all of the C-suite and the board, Colin mentioned the board, is thinking about how does this not disrupt business? Regulatory compliance, right? And doing this all in a way, the ability to do it again, as Gartner said, it's not one and done, the ability to do all of this again. So that's what success looks like in my view.
So what's the cost of inaction if people don't act? I mean, paint the picture. Let's get into that because I think there's a lot to learn from business continuity, one, staying in business and thriving, right? That's the goal. So risk management, stay in business. Then the other side of the coin is innovation.
That's right.
So what's the cost of inaction?
When we come to the risks and the cost of inaction, I think there are 3 things to think about. One is, what are some critical milestones to hit? So some of the milestones is operational resilience. Think about the most mission critical systems in your environment, inventory them, discovery, inventory, and making sure that those systems are on the top of the food chain for quantum cyber readiness. The second is enterprise, and then casting that net wide to enterprise readiness across your enterprise. And the third is sponsorship, exec sponsorship, and also a cross-quantum readiness team and execution team across the organization. There is no one team, there is no one organization. It is multifaceted, and it has to be a cross-function. So when we think about it this way, we're saying the cost of inaction would impact regulatory inevitability with competitive positioning. And what helps all of this is quantified risk articulation. And so let me give you an example. One of the things we continue to talk about when we had ransomware was harvest now, decrypt later. That sort of risk exists today for quantum cyber readiness. You can harvest now a data that's not quite ephemeral, biometrics and other long-lived data, and then you can think about as quantum safe readiness becomes and quantum computers become available to decrypt later, and even Gen AI technologies. So that's a very imminent risk for any organization right now. Multiple banks have put it at upwards of 500 million if that happens. And so they said, yes, we're ready to invest in 8 million, a fraction of that cost into the readiness of quantum safe. So the cost of inaction, again, comes back to the paradox. Do you want to invest now because the window is shrinking on readiness, and articulate your risks, quantify those risks, and make sure that the investments are comparable?
Colin, we had a term we made up called quantifying, quantify the risks. Business model transformations happening. We're seeing that. Can you share your thoughts on the cost of inaction on your side? Because the way you see it, you deal with a lot of customers all through the spectrum of digital transformation, business model transformation. Deloitte does that all the time. That's their business. In quantum, what is the cost of inactions from your perspective? How do you get leadership? How do you light a fire under leadership and saying, yo, look, pay attention, this is going to happen?
There's a couple of aspects to that. And one thing that, sometimes we talk about is we look at quantum as having two sides to the coin. One is all of the use cases, simulation, modeling, drug discovery, and so on. When we started the project with the World Economic Forum back in 22, I think it was, to work on their quantum security project, one of the phrases that sort of rang around at that point was, don't let the quantum cyber risk aspects of this overshadow all of the positive benefits that will arise out of quantum computing. And it sounds like a sort of a trivial statement. When you think about it, we don't want the world looking at, again, what should be just a perfunctory set of upgrades to cryptographic algorithms. We don't want that overshadowing all of the positive benefits that quantum computing can bring. So that's one layer of it. In terms of inaction, the way that I really start to look at it now, as Lakshmi mentioned, harvest now, decrypt later is definitely, a threat that has been lingering for a few years now. We've certainly heard a lot of stories about that occurring. I think that, and not to diminish that as a threat, it certainly is a threat. Obviously, national security biometric data, as Lakshmi mentioned, is a good example as well, where you need to have permanence of the data. So there are areas where that is very much a threat. I actually think that the bigger threat to business operations is more around what I referred to earlier, which is the asymmetric cryptography that is at risk through this attack is the one that we use to establish secure transactions, to establish secure point-to-point connections, whether it's human to human, human to machine, or machine to machine. So you think about that in terms of all over the world, all of the digital interactions that we do, it's all predicated on this asymmetric cryptography. So again, if you're an organization that is a bit of a laggard, and I'm not saying today, again, you need to rush out and upgrade everything, but let's say 2-3 years down the line, you've not even started, you've not got your roadmap in place, you're not thinking about implementation, suddenly you might be an organization that is not compatible with your peers. And you think about, I had a call this morning with a financial institution, and they were talking about all of the supply chain they have, the third-party vendors that they interact with, all of the networks, of course, that a financial institution has to be part of. Each of those components, you don't want to be the weakest link in that ecosystem, because if you are, you might be switched off, and then of course it affects your business operations calamitously.
Yeah, and that's the continuity piece, and I love that you can quantify that on paper too. That's definitely getting it.
Right.
Colin, let's stay with you on the trust thing. You brought up, you hinted at that in terms of trust. Trust is a huge piece here in the equation as readiness goes to transformational practice, because we're starting to see signs of that now. Customer zero, people are going down to the infrastructure layer, business model, business cases are being made. Talk about the trust and how important that is right now. If you get early now, you can move faster. Talk about how that plays out in the trust piece.
Yeah, so I think it all really comes back to certified products and components within your ecosystem. And what that means is we threw out numbers a couple of years ago where we think around 60% of the implementation, the remediation, will be done by hyperscalers. 20 to 25% maybe is done by dedicated security providers, PKI vendors, hardware security modules, and the like. And then the remainder will be bespoke applications that make cryptographic calls to libraries. So you've got to think about it a little differently for each of those. The hyperscalers have been out in front of this for a while, and I don't see much concern about them getting to where they need to be. Dedicated security providers are very far along that path as well. When you get to bespoke applications, I think you need to be a little cautious about some of the algorithms, the libraries that are used. Really what would underpin all of that and provide the trust, though, is a certification program. The algorithms were released on August 13th, I think it was, 24, and NIST unusually issued the test vectors at the same time. So people can say, my algorithm works as expected, but what we've not seen yet is the full-scale certification program that they normally have, that they run through commercial organizations. I think when you start to see that, and then other types of certifications and assurances that are given around that, again, it's all going to play into this ecosystem of assured components that can mutually authenticate against each other and reliably transfer that trust across any transaction.
Yeah, Lakshmi, this brings up a good point, talking about some of the operational, but also touching on some of the relationships involved, supply chain, parts of the network. How should people be talking to each other on the trust side? So you got the operational, you got the standards, which is great, we love standards, it sets the table. But now you got to implement, you got people, process, technology. What's the relationship side? How do you get people talking? And what do they say?
The way my experience in that has been that we look at what are the outcomes, what are some shared goals, what is it that they seek. Part of what they seek may be driven by their customers. Part of what they seek may be driven, Colin talked about the supply chain ecosystem, right? You don't want to be the weakest link. So the context is highly varied for the organization, but a couple of things that help is what are your outcomes, what are your shared goals, working backwards from there. And what does working backwards look like? It looks like three things. What is the proactive steps you take now? We talked about the business case for the now. What are reactive responses upon an incident, upon an event? And what does like a post-event or a post-breach planning and response look like? Those three are very important. It was no different with when cloud and SaaS was the wave in the mid-2000s, and then we had, Gen AI come, and now we have quantum. We go through the same thing. What is now? What is next? And what do we need to be ready for forever, right? So those conversations really help with building that relationship with stakeholders.
Colin, if you don't mind, I'd love to go to you for a quick comment on the psychology of the conversations. What are people talking about outside of the operational piece? What are some of the conversations you're involved in?
Well, I think there is, it usually starts with when is this going to happen, right? So that's part of the initial conversation. And as I explained earlier, that's how we talk about in terms of the time that it will take to prepare and so on. So that's one aspect of it. We've also heard, things like, well, I'm not sure I'm using cryptography here. And then you are. It's right there, right? So some of the applications that were written 20 years ago that may not, they pulled in cryptography, or 10 years ago. There's a little bit of digging around that needs to be done sometimes on that. But the biggest thing, I think, and I love the way that Lakshmi brought up the outcome-based. We want to put this on a playing field where people can understand it relative to their other risks. And again, try to sort of normalize the dialogue around it. What we did to try and help with that is we pulled together, first of all, we took the word quantum out of a paper we put together. It's a profile, and it's on cryptographic resiliency. And it's a profile to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's been out now for about 11 years or so. I was fortunate to be able to help NIST to develop that at the time. It's outcome-based, right, which is good. And, so we put together a profile that tries to articulate the steps that are required to mitigate the threat of quantum, but it's done in a way that is cryptographic resiliency, gets into a lot of the topics we talked about today in terms of good governance, policy, understanding where your crypto is and making the changes and so on. But that sort of is one of the ways that we are trying to work with the understanding that people have today of cyber risk, rather than get into some of the changing the mindset type discussions that really was at the heart of your question, I think.
Yeah. Things look good on paper, but when you put it into practice, sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. It's kind of a general concept. But from theory to funding, okay, how do you get the budget approval? What's the scope of that? What does that look like? Because now you get people's attention. They're leaning into it. They're looking at it. They're getting enthused about the prospects of this is an operational upgrade. People are buying in to it. They see the upgrades. They see some of that language. They understand. They need to be confident. And that's when budgets hit. So can you guys share, Colin, we'll start with you, what you're seeing on, okay, we got a plan for this. What's the budget look like? Who makes the approval? What's the size? What's the steps? Phased approach? Share your thoughts.
So the first thing that we started doing about 6 to 9 months ago was trying to convince customers that they didn't need to necessarily go off and do a full inventory across the entire enterprise to start. We said, let's do a selected set of inventories where you get an understanding of what your architecture looks like. Then you can start to plan out what remediation you want to start thinking about, build out your roadmap and your strategy, and then iterate. And you can expand upon your view of the enterprise as you go forward. One reason that that's important is it's good early on to get visibility into where existing programs can be leveraged. I mentioned PKI modernization is typically one we're hearing about. Certificate lifetime, the changes that is causing is another good program that can be leveraged to do post-quantum cryptography updates at the same time. So getting that early insight into the unique roadmap, and the reason that I say it's unique is that you have to prioritize. You have to look at where the business processes are that would be most impacted by this threat and think about how to resolve that. Start to build towards that. Some of it is simply putting more pressure on supply chain, right? That's an aspect of it, going back to what I said earlier about who's going to remediate on this. Other parts is getting better visibility. Other parts is socialization with the ecosystem so that you're assured that everybody is going to rise to the same level. Who's required to make the decisions? Well, pleasingly, we're seeing a lot more that more people than the CISO are being involved as well, the CIO oftentimes as well, because this is a technology transformation. We want to make sure that whilst the CISO is normally responsible for managing the risk, looking at the risk, it needs to be a multi-year project and it needs to be shared responsibility across a couple of different parts of the organization. So those are the steps that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of cases now where organizations want to get a sense of that longer-term vision, longer-term strategy, longer-term implementation roadmap, because they don't really know where to start. And so helping them to start within a quick 3-4 month assessment and discovery project seems to be the way that they're looking at right now, and then planning for the long term beyond that.
Lakshmi, talk about the business case. How do you craft it? How do you get the approval? How do you accelerate the project? What's your thoughts on some of those things?
I believe when you put together the business case for quantum safe readiness, it's no different than any other newer technology like Gen AI or cloud or SaaS or microservices or anything that came before this, right? It's all about what are the risks, what are the reduction mechanisms, investments that go into that, what's a return on investment, right? So those bare bones still stay the same. But what will help to set this up for success in terms of that conversation are two things. Colin touched upon it. The classical crypto journey, which is PKI modernization, is upon you right now. There are changes coming as early as March 2026, and thereafter every other year, with certificate validities at 47 days, domain validities reducing to 10 days, and so on. So the classical crypto journey is on a 2029 alignment path. It just so happens that the post-quantum crypto readiness is on a similar path to 2029. So this is where the stars have aligned with classical and the hybrid quantum model, which is good for organizations because they don't have to think of them as separate tracks, but see how one investment in one can amplify another. But classical crypto readiness is a foundational operational requirement to even think about quantum safe readiness. So I think organizations should look at it in those. And then risk articulation. Let's be whether it's harvest and decrypt later, whether it is other risks such as the critical infrastructure, certificates, DNS, PKI, software, code signing, any of those, let's articulate it. There's always a quantifiable framework to put. And then that helps with the return on investment. This is always a CFO question, right? The CFO is always like, okay, where's my return on investment? And so that's always good to have.
Yeah, and be in business. Thank you so much for coming on this panel. Appreciate you, Colin. Lakshmi, really appreciate the insight. Thanks so much for your time, Colin. Thanks for coming in. Lakshmi, great to see you in the studio here. I'm John Furrier for the panel on business case. scoping the opportunity, understanding it, how to ask the right questions, and be ready. Thanks for watching.